Test 1 2 1 2. Okay. On the screen. All right. Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome. Real quick. Unlike the previous speaker, my mom didn't have me take like a video. But what I do have are a bunch of haters. All right. So if you have anybody who was ever like, hey, you're not good enough, you don't belong here, right? We're gonna do this for them, okay? On 3. It's going to get real loud. This is on video. Real loud, real hype. 1, 2, 3. That's right. We got our foghorn. If you haven't already, go ahead and scan the QR code. I like to make my slides and demos interactive. We're gonna have some fun today. It was like, what? How's he doing that? Cloudy with a chance of GraphQL. If you don't get the meme, we're referring to Cloudy with a chance of meatballs. Kids love that movie. And we're going to be discussing all of these services right here. So if this looks super weird to you and you're like, I don't know what the hell any of these services are, I was expecting meatballs, don't worry. We're going to go through that stuff. Let's get the boring stuff out of the way. My name is Michael Liendo. I go by Focus Otter everywhere online. You can find me there. I'm a senior developer advocate, so I get to travel and talk to amazing folks like yourselves. I'm a little like coming down off of my food coma. I had some awesome friends take me out to lunch. I'm an avid taco eater, and they took me to a spot called Bodega. If any of the, hey, you see, you guys know about that already. So let's go ahead and jump into it. A couple things we're going to be talking about. What is a SaaS app? I think a lot of us saw that there's a big old convention going on. Bunch of companies here, business partners, etc. It's Miami Startup Week. They know about SaaS apps. I need to make sure that my React friends know about it too. In particular, we're going to be talking about a micro SaaS. So we're going to niche it down a little bit because a SaaS can mean a whole bunch of things. And then we're going to be talking about how does this look typically of what you see out in the wild? How are companies doing this? And then how are the big dogs doing this? How are they doing it when they're working with AWS? And along the way, we'll dive into the services, and I have a quick little demo at the end to show you sort of the full picture. All right. Context is important. So micro SaaS as opposed to any full-on SaaS, all right? What it stands for is software as a service. Oftentimes you'll hear software as a solution. So when you take a micro SaaS, essentially what you're doing is you're saying, hey, I want to focus on one particular problem. So not a full-on platform. Instead, it's going to be a tool, some kind of service that solves a need for a very specific set of customers. Now, because of that, this is an excellent opportunity for folks like yourselves to take projects that you already have, take that idea that's been sitting on your notepad for way too long, and go ahead and turn that into a income-generating project. What we're looking at is going to be in the range of $5,000 to $10,000 MRR, monthly recurring revenue. And this is popular in sort of the indie hacker community here. I don't want to shame anybody, so I made a little mark across the folks. They can remain anonymous. That's not what this talk is about. But when you start to glue together a bunch of different services, you can get this sort of Frankenstack where you're piecing things together to form your full-on application. This is going to be the important parts of your app, right? Authentication. Where is the data living? Where are my images living? How am I going to form an API? Right? There are a bunch of great and excellent services out there already, and don't want to take anything away from them. But what does it look like when it's all under the same cloud provider? That's what we're going to be focusing on. So there are some key points to them. There's some benefits, right? When you work with a bunch of different third-party providers, they make it really easy for you to get set up. They have simple and powerful integrations. Oftentimes, you can get pretty far. You can get to production with them. And they have simple pricing models. Unfortunately, what that means is that you have to stitch those services together yourself. And now, because you have many third-party providers, you also have a bunch of points of failure, right? It's just the reality of it. If one SaaS provider goes down, how does that affect the rest of your application? Is the key focus there. And then, of course, that cost can scale quickly depending on how you're using them. The day one experience is great, but what does day 100 look like? Or other way of saying it is that the first 100 customers is very important. But what does it look like when you have 1,000, 10,000? It seems kind of crazy for that to-do application that you've been wanting to work on, but it happens. Now, I wouldn't be doing it justice if I didn't show what the stack I'm proposing today looks like. Okay. This is tried and true. I see this time and time again with a bunch of customers that I work with. What we have here is a typical NextJS application. I favor NextJS due to, well, you saw the talk earlier with Hassan from Vercel. It's amazing. And then we're working with Amplify JavaScript library. So there's a piece of Amplify that we're working with. Amplify hosting is going to be where we put this thing. And then we have all of the AWS services that we're going to have to be creating here. And these are basically going to be what you would end up using for an auth provider. You would use a third party for, or a database provider. Instead, we're just using the AWS services themselves. I like all the fire emojis on that one. Now, I'm going to do it justice, okay? I work at AWS, right? But I like to tell both sides of the coin. So considerations, right? What are the important bits when you start to construct these services? We just got to be real with it. Quick to set up. Okay, it is. Typically, you had one of two options. You could either click your way through the console, which was great until you realized that next time you had to do something, you had no idea how you found that one setting that you needed to get it all to work. Or you could use something something called CloudFormation. This allows you to script all of your actions, but it got messy. It was long, it's not pretty. I don't want to do it, and if I don't want to do it, I'm not going to ask you to do it. So now you do have simple integrations. This is what we're going to be showing on the very next slide. Simple pricing, because we are going to be working with managed services, serverless options. And because of that, this will scale with us, and you get all the bells and whistles out of the box. It's just up to you to hook it up. The great thing is that with the services that we're using today, it's very, very easy to get started. We have a single point of failure. There's an asterisk there. It's like, is that a downside or not? If AWS goes down, then yeah, it kind of sucks because your app is down. The good thing is, like, so is a third of the world. So I think you're in good hands, right? It's like, dang, nobody's buying my stuff, but they can't even watch Netflix and go on Twitter to complain about it. Manual stitching of services, that part is still there. You can't get away from it. We have a bunch of services that we have to put together. Instead of having them manually stitched from a bunch of third-party providers, we just do it within the cloud. And then the learning investment. This is going to be the big one, right? AWS, everyone here, if you've worked with AWS, and if you haven't even, you know it can be tough to get started with. But fortunately, there are tools and services that make this so much easier than how it had to be. I was talking with another cloud advocate earlier today, and I think we both settled on a week. Give it a week, delve into it, get into the weeds, ping me on Twitter, all of that good stuff. I think you'll find that it's not so bad. But, okay, we have a lot of services. This is half of all the services. I couldn't even put it onto one slideshow. So yeah, things can get out of hand pretty quickly, especially if you're new and you don't know what services are the best ones for your application. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the core services that every application should more than likely be kicking off with. But it's tough. So I alluded to the idea that we can script some of this stuff. It doesn't have to be with CloudFormation, which was this very verbose way of breaking things down. Nowadays, we can go ahead and say, hey, I want to create a database. And within 3 lines of code, you can create just that. In addition, if you need a place to store PDFs, if you need a place to store images, documents, text files, etc., that's what an S3 bucket is there for. Think of it like Dropbox, except it scales pretty much infinitely. Now, the benefit of this is you can use something you're already familiar with. This is TypeScript. This is with a scripting tool called the AWS CDK. I'm a huge fan of it. But we still need to break down what services do most SaaS apps need. Well, you need a way to get paid. right? We're all in tech. I'm assuming that no one is in tech because they want to work for free, right? So let's get a way to get paid. Let's just get that out of the way. You can roll your own, okay? I'm not even gonna put that out there. Don't put that on YouTube. Don't roll your own, right? Just X that part out. Use a payment provider. They handle all the PCI compliance. They handle all that stuff for you. So that way they get in trouble, you don't. You just need to make sure that you set it up. We're going to go with Stripe today. I'm a huge fan because of their webhook integrations. It's what we're going to be having in our demo later on. I'll show you how to piece all that stuff together. But there are some services, and this is a good point. There are some services that you should be using, even if they aren't AWS. Next up, we have authentication. I need my users to sign into my application. I need to know who they are. And there's a service called Amazon Cognito. This is what it looks like within the AWS CDK. And note what we have here, 50,000 monthly active users is what you get for free. Highly customizable. Do you want to sign in with email, password, Facebook, Google, Twitter, some third-party provider? You can get that typically set up very quickly, as you can see within this code example. And then you have triggers. And that's what you see on line 1, 2, 3, 4, Lambda triggers there. I want something to happen after a user has signed into my application. Essentially, you fire off a serverless function. It takes care of everything for you. You write the business logic that is based off of what your application is trying to do. You need a database, right? We need a place to store records, to store data. Now, previously, I showed you a 3 code example, but let's be real. It's not real world. But this is. Here, we have a database. We're saying, go ahead and just do the scaling for me. I will pay per request. Now, it's AWS. So when we start talking about payments, understand that we're talking about pennies in the beginning, and then it goes into maybe dimes and things like that. We're not talking about hundreds of dollars. And when you get to that scale where it is very expensive, like, come see me, shake my hand, because your business is probably doing very well. But then it comes down to, well, I started my data table off with, in this case, a typical SaaS table. Right? But my needs changed. Maybe I was looking up all of my users by their user ID. But then I realized that, you know what, I should probably look them up by address because it's more efficient. And that introduces the concept of a global secondary index. Essentially, take my data, take the information in there, and flip it. So that way I can query more efficiently. My favorite. This is the service team that I'm on at AWS. I specifically work on the AppSync team. We are a managed GraphQL service, which means that you don't have to set up the GraphQL server yourself. And in case you're wondering, we come with things like subscriptions out of the box. That's how we're getting all those cool emojis on the screen. AppSync is handling all of that. Now, I'm not using any GraphQL per se to get those emojis working. Really, what I'm doing is just taking advantage of that subscription. We give you 2 endpoints, an HTTP endpoint to handle all of your queries and mutations. And then you also have a WebSocket endpoint, which is what you can use to subscribe clients to events. We have customers as big as Ferrari, as big as HBO Max. Oddly enough, Taco Bell also. It's just random. They also use AppSync in their subscription service if you've used their delivery service. I'm from Iowa, so we don't have delivery of Taco Bell. We're not that cool. But as you can see here, it's schema-driven, right? You have queries, you have mutations, you define what you're looking for. In this case, the recipe is an example of a recipe SaaS application. You'll see that in the demo. And someone spammed me. It happens in every talk. I love it. Here we go. Next up, we have a, if this keeps going, we're just going to have to deal with it. After the schema, we also have the idea of an API. We need to define one within the CDK. So we have our recipe API. We're going to give it a name. It needs to know where our schema is. So the next part is just using a file path to define it. And then we give it certain authorization. The cool thing is that with AppSync, it integrates directly with Cognito. So you don't have to wire that part up yourself. It actually also integrates with DynamoDB, the database that we just saw. And the benefit of that is that you get serverless because you don't have to set up this GraphQL server yourself. But then you also get functionless because there's a direct integration. Again, the benefit of it all being under AWS is that they could just talk to one another. There's no network request that has to happen. Huge benefit, cuts down on latency. Your customers will appreciate it. So let's revisit that. This is our micro SaaS application. And all of a sudden, it doesn't look so scary, except for like the emojis popping up. You have authentication in place. Right? You have an API. It's being handled by AppSync. You have an S3 bucket to store your images. And then we have CloudFront in the mix to serve them efficiently to your users so that they're cached. And this is optional, but I like to throw in Cloudinary in the mix just because they do a really awesome job in serving content in a format that is best for your users. So there's no you have to use AWS rule. Pick and feel somewhere on the spectrum between that Frankenstack I showed you earlier and full-on AWS, and I think you'll find a sweet spot with something that looks a lot like this diagram. So let's jump into a demo. Let me go ahead and switch things over here. Cool. So, Otterlicious, right? Let's take your typical SaaS application. If you've seen this format, I know you have 100 times. Okay, you have a big old hero image, and it's like, hey, here's my product. Come sign up for it. We'll offer you a free trial. If you've seen my tweets lately, you know I'm a sucker for subscriptions. $400, in case you haven't seen it, that I have on monthly subscriptions alone. It's ridiculous and embarrassing, and I can't believe I've word vomited that on stage. But then next up, you typically have like, hey, here are our cool features to get you more enticed. This is literally me from lunch today, served with Cloudinary. Bodega is amazing. Awesome time with friends, but we're dealing with recipes. So if I liked that taco, and I did, then I'm going to go ahead and create a recipe to have that information in there. And then next up, you have things like, oh, there's some cool testimonial because, you know, our product is amazing, followed by footer, right? You've seen that before. So this is a live application in the sense that I know exactly how to make it work for demos. So let's go ahead and sign up. Maybe bump it up a little bit. Cool. We get this big ugly screen, right? It's not conforming to the colors of my application. You can, of course, theme it and do all that customization yourself. You can get fully custom and just use our authentication APIs. I just went with what is the easiest. Within here, where's my mouse? This is using AWS Amplify. This is the out-of-the-box component. So I'm going to go ahead and type this in here. I'm going to say empty Liendo Miami for the password. There we go. Notice that I get error handling out of the box as well. Miami. Cool. Now, all the code for this is open source, so I'll leave that for you to investigate. But notice that what I get out of the box also includes email verification. So assuming that I have this all set up correctly, testing the demo gods here, looks like I just got a code to type this in, and I didn't have to configure that, right? It was just given to me out of the box. There we go. Let's say 409.975. And great, I'm in my application. It took me to, again, something you've seen before. Once you go ahead and sign up, we'll get you to the payment screen. But what I want to go ahead and showcase is that over in the AWS console, I can check out my user pool. So every time a user signs up, they're stored into this user pool given by Cognito. Okay, cool. I have my user here, MT Liendo, Miami. They're confirmed. Let's go ahead and move on. Because all I have right now is their email. I don't have to worry about passwords. They're here. And let's set them up with like the recipe basic, right? You get a little something to get you enticed. This is using Stripe's default billing platform. So I'm going to go ahead and throw in a bunch of 4.2s because we're in test mode. If you know, you know. 05, we'll say anytime in the future. There we go. Miami Beach. And then let's go and start this trial. Now this is Stripe's platform, right? I'm no longer on my site. Okay. So this is processing. Hopefully my fake credit card goes through. And then if I check out my database, once this is all done, I should have a user in that record. And that is handled by that confirmation trigger, right? Stripe says, hey, we got done processing. They fire off a webhook. That webhook talks back to my database. That's how I keep things in sync. It's one of the hardest things to do when you build out a SaaS application, right? It's like, how do I wire things back together? So I'm going to open up my database right here, click refresh, and let's take a look at what we have. We have a user right here at the bottom. We have my email address. We have a Stripe customer ID. I'm set up on the recipe basic plan, but I'm currently trialing, okay? This is important because it's gonna switch in a little bit. In my application, I now have all the data I need to make sure that this user can access basic features, all right? I know what plan they're on. I know that they've subscribed to my service. We're good to go. But how do I make it so that they can access premium features? Well, for that, let's head back over to the application we have set up. You can see now I have additional stuff here. Now I'm logged in. And that's simply because there's an authenticated user that is picked up. That doesn't mean that I can access features. It just means that they know who I am. So let's go to, I think it's my recipes. I don't have any recipes here just yet. But what I do have is this billing portal. This is, again, handled by Stripe. They take me over to their dashboard. And from here, this would be a really awkward time for the internet to cut out. Let's go ahead and put in my email address, mtliendo plus Miami at focusotter.com. And I should get an email. There we go. Pro tip, right? Power of Mac is like I can just copy the link on my phone and it should pop up for me in my browser. Let's try it. Awesome. Here I am on this basic plan, recipe basic, and knows that I'm currently trialing. So if I update my plan, I come over here and say, you know what? Michael gave a really cool talk. I'm going to subscribe to the pro plan. So I'm going to click select, go to continue. Again, that webhook is going to fire off in my application. And if all went well, I now have a full-on flow here, where within my application, I know if that user is on the Recipe Pro plan, so I can provision additional services for them. My database is the source of truth. So if I refresh, this should change. And when I refresh, Recipe Pro, it's an active user, and I'm sweating bullets because I'm glad that worked. Great. Awesome. So there's a demo of how you can get this going. Again, this is open source, so you can inspect the code and all that good stuff. With that said, right, and you have a quick word, we got to bring it down a little bit. The reason why I started off this conference spree is because, as a lot of us know, this past year has actually been really tough for folks in tech. Okay? I've had friends log in, try to access their email, and they couldn't. Try to access their Slack accounts, and they've been cut off from Slack access. Okay? But many individuals feel security in the companies that they're with, which is fair, great companies. But something happened, and now they had to find an additional source of income. Okay? So I'm going to say at this point, if you build with something using that Frankenstack approach, fine. If you build with something using AWS, great. At the end of the day, make your own money. Right? Everyone should be empowered at some level, whether it's 5,000, 10,000, 20 bucks a month, doesn't matter. Get something out there so that you can have financial stability based off of your own terms. And I think all of us will be better off for it. With that said, my name is Michael Liendo. Thank you, React Miami. It's been great.